Welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast, where your host, Josh Sweeney, will give you, the business leaders, HR professionals, and company culture aficionados, the knowledge you need to take your company culture to the next level.
Hello, my name is Josh Sweeney, and welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about communication and how communication conveys a certain culture of your business or conveys the culture of your organization. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Prototype Prime for this amazing podcast room. If you haven't visited Prototype Prime, they are a technology co-working space in Peachtree Corners, and I recommend that you check them out. So, communication, what do I mean? On this podcast episode, we're really talking about the expectations that are set around the communications that happen internally and externally, how they happen, and what the timing of those communications are. So, when I go into that, it's, what are the response times on different mediums? So what is the response time? Are you using email? Are you using phone call? Is there an expectation to pick up the phone? What are they company-wide? What are they by department? So we're going to dig into various aspects of communication. And I'm going to do this by giving you multiple examples for people I know, companies I've worked with, people I've worked with, and people that I've worked for. So the first concept I like to highlight is your communication style interrupt or is it planned? Is it an interrupt style or a planned style? What I mean by this is I'm going to start off with the planned style because that's a pretty exceptional way to manage your day and manage your communication. I'm in EO, Entrepreneur Organization. I've mentioned that before in other podcasts. And in EO, we had a speaker, a great sales trainer, Jim Ryerson, come in. And we worked with Jim Ryerson on many different things in our forum meetings that I was a part of. And in that, we built up a relationship with Jim. And then at a later point, I emailed Jim to get some assistance. Well, when I emailed Jim, the first thing that happened was I got an autoresponder that, if I remember correctly, said, I check email 2 times a day at this time and this time in the order that they come in and in the order of priority, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Now, this is really an interesting concept because this day and age, you pretty much see people like keep their email up full time. They might as well be clicking refresh even though they don't have to, but they're looking at their email all of the time. Whereas Jim had this very structured, planned way that he was going to communicate, and he set those expectations up front. Now, the other thing that I see around this planned methodology is almost every time I see it come across, these are high-performing individuals. These are people who very much value their time. Time is money, and they just don't have the time to keep email up. They're on site a lot, and they have a good way to convey what those expectations are and then get back to you at a later point. I think that's an amazing way to do it. I would say most of the people I've worked with and most of the people I've seen are more on the interrupt methodology. They keep that email up all the time and they're constantly responding to the email instead of getting maybe other higher priority tasks done. So an example of this, I worked with an organization that had a 1-hour response time rule, internal and external, for all communications that you received, which were phone calls and emails the majority of the time. And this was really interesting because in this aspect, it was company-wide, and it didn't matter which department you were in, which I found to be rather cumbersome. I was doing consulting, so I was often on 1 and 2 hour training calls on site for 4 and 8 hours at a time. Yet when another customer emailed me and I didn't get back to them within an hour, that I generally heard about it. Well, why aren't you responding? Why aren't you available? And so it's kind of an interesting concept around this 1 hour response time. Now, I think 1 hour response time works for people that are not on site or not are more usually in a management track or have more availability to email versus the frontline folks that are really in front of those customers for long durations. So it was interesting to have the pressure of that 1 hour response time. And I really understand what they were getting at and what the intent was. But there were some challenges around the execution and the backup plan, knowing that that was not really achievable. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Another one that I ran into, I was doing a training for an organization or training with an organization a few weeks ago, and they actually outlined the response methodology that they want and the timing based on their salespeople. So each salesperson actually had, they offered text, cell phone, or text, phone calls, and emails. And they said, well, internally, based on text, calls, and emails, here's how we communicate. Externally to clients, here's what our expectation is on each one of those mediums, and here's how they work. So I found that to be a really interesting strategy and a level of clarity that I had not seen in any organization. I have never been in an organization that outlined what their communication methodologies were, each of the mediums, and the timing expectations that they had. So I think that was just an interesting way to take down those barriers and understand what the communication is and convey the culture and what you're looking for in the business and what they were looking for in the business when it came to all of those interactions. So when you're thinking about your interactions, think about whether it is, or your communication style, your communication as a culture, as a business, is it interrupt or is it planned? Are you conveying the message that our time is valuable and structured and that we will have planned and organized meetings? Or are you conveying to the client that you're waiting for their call at any moment and you will jump right on it? Now, there's pros and cons to each one of those, but which one are you conveying? Also, think about the expectations and responses based on medium. So do you text? Do you worry about text? Is there an expected response time from a text or a call or an email? So lastly, again, just think about the communication styles, think about the communication expectations in your company, how they affect your internal culture, as well as how it is perceived by your customers.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Epic Company Culture Podcast with Josh Sweeney. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. For additional content and transcripts, visit epicculture.co. If you have questions or topics you would like us to address or expand on, tweet us at epicculture1 or email at podcast@epicculture.co.